Hello. I'm the illustrious Dr. Luke. I slept 3 hours. I'm going to have to rely heavily on my co-host, Ostic from Northern India, and the lovely producer, Jordan. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about Chapter 27, Succession to the Soul from the abridged version of the Golden Bough. We'll talk about the contents of it in a moment. But like I usually do, I like to go around to these images that I have on the title slide. For those of you who may be new here, I'm working on a book project analyzing the archetypal significance of the imagery associated with the U.S. space program, specifically Apollo. And that has led me to some pretty strange places analyzing the archetypal psychohistory of it all. But the jumping point off from all of where this stuff comes from is the Golden Bough. And today, after we talk about the contents of chapter 27, we're going to look at some of these images and many more topics that I have contained on the title card. So just going around, we've been looking at these images of Marilyn Monroe doing performative reading. I wanted to take a closer look at some of the Arthur Miller texts that she is reading because it, in a way, reinforces some commentary that I had about the significance of her reading Ulysses. We're also going to be looking at the role of Shakespeare in the JFK administration, specifically Macbeth, but some other plays that were performed at a White House dinner for JFK 2 years before the assassination, but also the significance of Shakespeare in the Lincoln administration, which seems to be interconnected with the JFK administration. Last time we did not get a chance to talk about the Camelot Arthurian imagery that's associated with JFK. So we're going to delve into that, specifically looking at the parallels between the Philosopher's Stone, the blue marble, and the Holy Grail that is part of the Parsifal and King Arthur legend. We're going to look at some of the Christic imagery that is associated with JFK. I have alluded to it in passing. I think we're going to go deeper into it today. A lot of it was inspired. I got really obsessed with XTC as I started off this program with, and hopefully I don't get flagged by singing a part of the chorus from Senses Working Overtime. I looked at what was the video, one of my favorite videos as a child, The Ballad of Peter Pumpkinhead. And it's interesting that they could sense, and perhaps many other Americans and Europeans could as well, the crossover, the archetypal symbolism sharing that's going on between JFK and Christ. We're going to look at that. And I made some interesting discoveries. Last time we talked about the Apollinian dolphin and its association with JFK, but it's also going to be associated with Christ, which I had in all my years, in all my 45 years, I'd never heard about Christ being associated with dolphins. Apparently early on in Christianity, this was a pretty common thing. And of course, that's going to lead to an examination of the trident, which we see in Dealey Plaza, but also with the character of Neptune or Poseidon and what that potentially means. I have John Shelby Downard's picture up here because some of these insights, I don't know which ones, I've lost track at this point, were partially inspired by a reading of a collection of his essays. Though we do not share conclusions, I do kind of like the way that he the sensitivity to some of these issues demonstrates in his work. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, not to mention some uncanny synchronicities with JFK and King Henry V. So yeah, I'll hand it back to you guys for a second.
I like this week's collage. It's fun.
Yeah.
This is very extensive, I think. A lot of images here.
Yeah.
It's really only a third of some of the subjects we're going to talk about. At some point it got so cluttered. I was just like, the rest of it will come out. So if you want to stick around past the initial 40 minutes or so that we spend talking about the contents of chapter 27, this is what we're going to be talking about. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, Jordan. I'm not going to spend a long time belaboring what I think the point of chapter 27 is. I'm going to try to summon up what I think the prime takeaway of it is. So if I had to bottom line it, we have looked at the king being the existential center of these of these mythopoetic cultures, these air quote savage nations, where the king himself is responsible for the stability and the organization of the culture. And we've looked at the routine assassination, regicide of the king. If the denizens believe that their universe has become destabilized by fragility in the king. Now, because there is such an emphasis on this divine right and passing and usurpation of the kingly role, there are practical concerns in these societies that are put on the back burner. For instance, like the amount of we see kings engaging in infanticide in order to prolong their kingship. They will start sacrificing. They will tap into the pool of their progeny and make sacrifices in order to prolong how long they stay in power. This is pretty disruptive. Or they use scapegoats that have their own interconnected webs of connection that can cause uprising as a result of attachments to the individual that is being used as the scapegoat. So there is a lack of long-term thinking frequently in these societies that are using the killing of the king ritual. And oftentimes it results in the annihilation of the king's family line. So other ways of prolonging the right of the kingship involve marriage, the struggle. There are violent struggle for the throne or whatnot. But sometimes they had to develop a new mechanism. It wasn't so much important that the king himself was magically connected through genetics to his successor. What they would do is they would start to use things like relics to capture the essence or soul of the king, so it could be passed on to whoever if it did shift out of that family line. So if the king expired, they would try to capture his breath in a relic. Or if he had something potentially associated with him, the real king was the one that had this relic. It was passed on to him, somehow his essence. So the act of violence was sort of necessary in order to free this divine essence, but it didn't kind of just go around in ether. It had to be captured by something if it didn't immediately go into a body. So then there becomes this struggle for the relics. And so you have competing claims between individuals who may be genealogically rightful heirs and individuals who are in possession of these relics. And in that case, the relics actually trumps that line. So I find this to be a particularly fascinating development in our understanding of the killing of the king ritual and how it can be passed on to other individuals. I'd never really contemplated the idea of the divine king's essence being transformed into a relic or temporarily housed there. And I think that has some interesting implications, especially when we look at JFK. And I want to I'll pause after we look at this slide. I was able to put this together late last night. I haven't thought through it as much as I would like. I'm not really sure. There's this claim by Downard and others that the killing of the king ritual is going on with the Kennedy assassination. I don't know. I'm still on the fence about this. I see how there is some harmony between this ritual and what goes on with JFK, but I'm hesitant to ascribe that much intentionality to conspirators, or something like that. Especially since the society at large seems to want to push this conspiratorial narrative. But there is harmony. I will not deny that. Some of the things that I wanted to look at were this aspect of an artifact containing the essence of the king. I hadn't really looked into this. And late last night I started to think about it. I was like, oh yeah, Jackie and the eternal flame. She's the first to light the eternal flame. Why do we even have these things like eternal flames? Is it just about remembrance, memorial, or is there something deeper here? Like something like JFK's essence, though it's been liberated from its fleshly, temporary body, is somehow contained in this flame that is perpetually burning at Arlington Cemetery. And I think there might be something to that, not to mention we have all the Saturn rockets that go to the moon. They take off from Kennedy Space Center. I think it was like a few weeks after the assassination, they renamed the Space Center in Florida to the Kennedy Space Center. And I want to look closer at that because it's almost got like ziggurat kind of feel to it. There's a very boxy thing that they kept the Saturn rockets in, but I'll save that for next time. I haven't had a chance to go deeper into that. But this continuation of the fire on earth to the fire to the heavens, I wonder if there is the transmigration of this essence, this energy has left Kennedy, but is being put into artifacts such as the flame and the rocket and the center to go into outer space. I think that's interesting. And something, we've been talking about throughout our examination of these topics are the uncanny parallels between Lincoln and Kennedy. One that I've kind of just glossed over, but now thinking about a little bit differently in light of the artifact transmission of essence is the limousine that Kennedy was killed in. It was a Lincoln limousine. And a lot of people note this as a synchronicity, but it is an artifact. And I have to wonder, is there something of the fate or the essence of Lincoln that is transferred into this car? And I have a good friend, Nikki, who I've brought up many times on this podcast. She's really fixated on cars being this symbol for karma. And at first, when we first started talking about this, I was like, maybe. And as time has gone on, Jordan and I did a breakdown of Vanilla Sky. And I think at that point, I was like, okay, this is definitely a thing. If you've seen Vanilla Sky, the idea of cars and karma is like huge, right? And it connects, I've contended it connects to the Beatles, but that's a whole other topic. Anywho, there seems to be something very karmic about cars and the fact that he's in a Lincoln. Now, do I think that someone is trying to imbue Lincoln's essence into this car so that the fate of the 16th president is transferred to the fate of the 35th president, and then that his essence is transferred to the flame, which is transferred to the rocket? I don't know. I don't think so. I think this is more of the imagery of the reality constellating around these things. I don't necessarily think that that is happening, but you can see it a little bit there. And something else that was talked about in the Frazer, and then I'm going to stop talking and let the guests give their commentary, is if the soul wasn't transferred to a relic, an artifact, the successor to the king would sometimes ingest and eat something of the previous king, his heart, his hair, his bones ground up or something like that. And that got me thinking, no one knows where Kennedy's brain is. Do I think someone's eating his brain? No. But I do find it interesting that it's gone. And there is some speculation that RFK took it. Who knows? I don't know anything about that, which raises very interesting questions about the shared fate of the brothers. But this idea of something being taken out of the old king and put into the new king is a theme in Frazer's short chapter. So do I think any of this is conclusive to saying, oh yeah, the killing of the king ritual is going on here? No, but it is an interesting way to perhaps interpret these events. So I'll pause there and let everybody else talk.
So this was a very long introduction. I'm really excited to talk about it. So
Sorry.
oh, no. I was thinking about ideas and I'm like, okay, I'll say this here. Okay, now we move on to another
Yeah.
topic. Okay, one thing I wanted to point out was that last episode we discussed about the Apollo thing, and we connected it with 2001: A Space Odyssey. And it says, and I postulated that maybe since they're carrying the other space men that are hibernating or like half dead, and it could be seen as carrying the dead to heaven or something, the moon mission.
Yes.
So I had a synchronicity this somewhat a synchronicity this week. So it was about the July 20th plot to assassinate Hotler. It was a inside job. They were trying to kill him, but it was supposed to happen on July 20th, and that is also the date of the Apollo mission. So what they named that mission was Operation Valkyrie. And what is Valkyrie? Valkyrie is a psychopomp or an entity in Norse mythology that there are only 12 Valkyries, and they carry the souls of the dead from the battleground to Valhalla. So I thought that was interesting because okay, there first the 12th connection and then July 20th connection and then who is being carried to Valhalla? Okay, the Hitler, because Hitler is dying, he will be carried to Valhalla. I'm not sure about what the metaphor is, but I thought that was interesting. That I thought that it might connect it to the Apollo thing, that it's still carrying the soul, because you mentioned it's an essence of Kennedy and he's dead, so he's being represented by this relic and he's being carried to the moon in some way.
Yes,
Is it?
I really enjoy that. I have something I want to I want to get Jordan's feedback. I'm going to put something in the chat for her to bring up when she's ready. But I think that's really profound. We've also looked at this idea of like space burials and what that means, and the taking souls from Earth into heaven. It makes me wonder about. Do you guys know about this? The first and only artifact that was put on the moon. It's this thing called the fallen astronaut. I plan on talking about it at some point. I'm not read up on it, but it's this figurine that an artist made that I can't remember which, it probably says there in the fine print, about that was taken up there and put next to this like playing card of all the different astronauts that died in the process of getting to the moon. You know, the astronauts for Apollo 1, and I think there are like 14 names on it. I have to check. But yeah, now that we're talking about artifacts and the transmission of souls, I think this comes back into play. Not unlike what you had to say about the coffins and the stasis containers that are in 2001. Somehow their essence there, and all these different artifacts that are left on the moon. I have to revisit that.
This looks like a tuning fork, this fallen man. Style.
Yeah, it's a very bizarre piece of space history. Uh, it, there's a lot going on here. I mean, he also kind of looks like the logo for like a restroom a little bit, but he's missing his arms. I feel like that's pretty significant. And then for the plaque, they didn't put down like a formal plaque. They used this playing card. It's almost kind of like psychopathic. You know how like the Joker or something like that would leave like a playing card at a crime scene or something like that. So
Yeah, it's that
I feel
people
like
used
there's a
to do
lot
it in
going on here.
Vietnam War. When they killed
Yeah,
people.
yeah, the Ace of Spades, which I've wanted to talk about that a little bit in regards to the horse imagery associated with JFK, because his riderless horse was named Blackjack, right? And you know, typically
Yeah,
the way you get Blackjack is, you know, there are certain cards. There's like a Suicide King, and then the Ace of Spades is like a death card. So
yeah, sure. Because death and taxes, right? Oh, okay, that's
right,
another thing. Okay, whatever. I wanted to say one more thing, that you talked about Lincoln being associated with being him carrying on forward in our timeline as a relic. That was very interesting. That I mean, it's a divine coincidence or something that it's happening. That it's in a car named Lincoln, and I really appreciate that. Other than that, according to the chapter, what I felt was it was quite graphic the way he described it, that
it
you had
was.
to steal the breath from the king's mouth as he was dying, like one of the sons had to like take in his last breath. That was pretty gnarly to think about, but in the sense that how would it affect people psychologically? Like, why does it even matter to us to have a connection to the previous king? Like, this is a very people do not want anything new, they want a continuation. So a lot of time I think about, okay, which president succeeded I mean, Donald Trump, he succeeded Joe Biden. So before the election, he was talking about a lot of things. He was saying, I'll do this radically different, I'll do that radically different. But as soon as he assumed that position, he had his hands tied. Now he's rolling back on his promises. He's not fu- stopping the war. Whatever promises he made, it's like there's a curse from the previous administration that's carrying him. And like in that marriage of trying to preserve that continuity, he took up that disease from the previous administration. This is what it feels like, that this is kind of necessity or something. I mean,
Yeah,
does that make sense?
yeah. I mean, whatever's arranging this, right? I think when something you said got me thinking about, you know, and I hadn't really combined these two images because it occurred to me late last night about the Lincoln limo and JFK, but we had this previously. We talked about Marilyn Monroe carrying around the portrait of Lincoln in the back of a car, and in a way foreshadowing the Kennedy assassination. I don't know. It's almost, I kind of want to have this like split view where there does seem to be some sort of energy transmigration that is going on, but it doesn't seem like there's particular ritual or individuals that are in charge of it. It seems like kind of like the reality itself is orchestrating this. And maybe this is just like figures sliding into the archetypal grooves that reality is set up with. Like I almost see it as like reality to me is like kind of becoming a little bit like a mechanical assembly line. And so once you get, if you're like, okay, I'm going to go down this assembly line, you're going to get stamped with these different things over and over and over again. Like I'm trying to think about how this archetypal syntax like works. I don't know if Jung would agree with any of that, but
Until you get off the assembly line.
yeah, maybe so. That's what I also wonder too, is like we'll look at all the different Shakespeare stuff. Like maybe it seems so obvious, like looking back and all this stuff, but like JFK seems sensitive, and Lincoln himself, especially with their love of Shakespeare and kings that are killed. Like it seems like they knew in advance that they were going to be sacrificed. Especially, and they kind of associated themselves with this imagery, and like they were like, well, why not get off the assembly line? Why continue down the path?
Um, what do you think about all of this in a sociological context? Like people are living in a society. I get it that you're trying to come up from a archetypical perspective that it's emerging into a cultural consciousness, but in a sociological sense, like again, I wanted to talk about that thing that you cannot let go of that past in that way. That the lineage has to have some sort of a connection, and it follows around like a baggage for the new successor. This is what I felt like from that, and that he had to prove himself that I am a successor to that king. That is why. And see, I have this relic. See, I ate his heart. See, his whole essence is in my body now. And it's like you have to prove yourself to be that. So what kind of social conditioning would like enforce this kind of tradition? Sometimes I think about it, because the king is a temporary thing. The people around him, they are permanent. They are the ones who decide what will happen when the next one comes.
Well, maybe I mean, I don't think it's going to be a complete answer, and I really want to get Jordan. I have Jordan really hasn't talked much so far, but something I do want to say quickly is that maybe when these individuals like Lincoln and Kennedy are cut down prematurely, and maybe there's something that like within the collective psyche that yearns for the return and that recognizes these things as incomplete, and it's going to be projecting and associating some sort of pressure when the figure appears on the world stage again. Like when it seems like, you know, certain individuals on the world stage like naturally complete their arc and not like traumatically cut down as in the ways that Lincoln and Kennedy were. Like it's easier to move on. It's like it's easier to move on from them. But something maybe because of the trauma, it creates like a death pressure. We're constant in the back of our minds somewhere. We're expecting this figure to rise again because there's the imagery that's associated with a lot of these king figures, like with Odysseus. We've looked at Ulysses and JFK. Ulysses eventually returns. And I think I said this last time, like perhaps that's where like the obsession in QAnon comes from, is like there's this sense that something was unfinished with JFK. And it's like, well, there's this glimmer of hope that his son faked his death and is going to come back somehow as this shadowy character named Q. I
That's also
wonder
the
if
Christian story.
it is too.
Everybody's
right?
waiting for the return.
The second coming, yes. And there's a lot of reason to think that there's overlap between Ulysses and Jesus. We looked at last time, the pig story, right? The Bay of Pigs, the Circe turning the soldiers into pigs, and Jesus casting the demons into the pigs off the cliff. It's repeating.
I think we're always waiting until we undergo our own individuation.
Yeah. Us, like, I don't think my answer exhausts what you're looking
No,
for.
not at all.
But I mean, Does that help in any way, what I said
Yeah,
there?
yeah, it helps. The thing about QAnon that resonated with this information. Yeah,
If
that's
you
really
talk to
interesting.
people too when this occurred, who like when I talked to my family about it, the anniversary of the assassination was last year, the year prior. So it was very top of mind locally for everyone in Dallas that was there. It still evokes trauma. It was much bigger for people than JFK. Like they really latched on to this bigger narrative of Camelot, and they feel like this golden age that they were approaching was cut short. And then you see it playing out over and over again, the golden age rhetoric with Trump happening now. So
That's right.
I don't have the answer, but the cycle continues. And I could theorize why someone would want to maintain a unstable cycle like that. It is very compelling. It sucks people in. It gets people to invest their own energy and prana into it to continue the project, whatever the project is. So,
Well, it raises an interesting question about what the point of memorials are. Are the memorials like just a nice thing we do to be like, JFK was a nice guy, or it like keeps us in this traumatized state? Like you talked about like people in
it does.
Dallas for the 60th anniversary. There's all sorts of reminders of the event there. Like just doing the research to try to get my mind around this stuff. I think there's still like an X marks the spot, like on the road
So I
in
want to get
Dealey
into that.
Plaza. Sure, go for it.
And you see this playing out as well with 9/11. You see this
Yeah.
playing out. My own more local version of 9/11, I would say, is the bonfire accident that happened at Texas A&M University. And you see a lot of continued traditions around that. And I'm not trying to say we shouldn't commit, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to make a judgment or a moral point at all. I'm just saying, like, there's clearly these patterns that loop, and even therapy, right? Like in many ways, sometimes these ways of digesting or working through these traumas, sometimes they do prolong them. I definitely see that happening. At my university, people would wake up at I think it's like 3, 4 a.m. to go to a memorial at the exact time the accident occurred every year. And they go to the
Mm,
exact spot on the land where the accident occurred, and there's a circle where the
right.
accident occurred that markates exactly where everything occurred. It is very magical. So, at the beginning, you're talking about the corporeal transference.
Hmm.
To me, that's so fascinating, and how corporations work. We have the same word in there, but seeing it in this context made me feel a little less weird about it. A lot of you can go down all these word games and, oh, corporations are dead and this and that. Well, but there is some type of transference. They only move because human life moves them. They are dead. They're not real. They're fictions. But human essence gets infused into them, and it's this vehicle that allows different people to come in and out, but this container is maintained the entire time, which is super fascinating to me. But a different point I wanted to make is just to bring everyone's attention to the memorial that is at Dealey Plaza.
Right.
So, and I've been there often. It's energetically a very interesting place. Dealey Plaza is not huge. You can walk around it pretty quickly, but this is the memorial, and it's like a few
It's very
blocks.
it's very strange looking. It's
It's a
very
box.
strange.
It's
Yeah.
a box. So this is an aerial view. It's quite large when you're in front of it. And then, so this is more kind of what you would see if you walk up to it. It's this huge box. It almost looks a little Lego-esque. And there's two openings, almost two, like how you would imagine pyramids and things that line up with this, like just two open slits. And when I'm there, it very much feels like an energetic container. And earlier on in my awakening journey, I felt all this stuff was super evil. I don't think this memorial is evil, but there is a lot going on. But it is a container, it holds energy, it is a gridded structure. And when you go inside of it, we talked about this before, but I just wanted to bring it up again. There's basically a monolith. This is the whole memorial. There's no statue. You almost think too, like, it would make sense to have a statue on a plaque like this, right? It almost looks like something would be there. Often people are leaving flowers and things on it. But I just find all of this so fascinating. It's a container, it's a box for the energy. And I don't think it's bad. The inscription outside of it is very lovely. It talks about how the people of Dallas came together, and this is to celebrate what Kennedy represented, the hope, the dreams, the Camelot vision. So, really, this is a container that the people of Dallas co created, I think, to kind of store that energy, which is very interesting. I don't know if that's intentional or not, or on what level. There's also a lot of very weird, very dark gritting going on in Dallas as well. And other people may visit these places and have a totally different vibe or feeling of it. I'm just kind of reporting intuitively how I felt about it. There's other parts of Dealey Plaza that do not feel this way, that feel very dark to me. But the whole monolith thing, it's very Saturnian. It's very fascinating. And then you mentioned too, I don't have it up yet, but the X's on the ground, they're
Oh,
still
there's
there.
so much. Yeah.
They're still
I
there. Have
mean,
you
there's a
been there, Luke?
literal. No, I haven't. But I mean, I've just looked at all the imagery of it, especially looking at the trident symbolism this week and trying to understand what that may mean. But there's a literal X on the ground, which, you know, that's it's a cross, which is feeds into the idea that there is some sort of Christic overlap with JFK.
Right, and they maintain it, right? You can see even
Yeah.
in this picture, the old one faded, so they've added it. It's the same way that you would mark a road so that
Yeah.
everybody stays in the lines.
That's
This is
very
a
bizarre.
very intentionally curated space. There's a lot going on in a very small amount. I mean,
Like
the courthouse is behind it,
it's
which isn't.
begging you to associate it with Christ in my mind. Like there's a lot of different other ways you can say, okay, this is where it happened. Like X marks the spot. Like it seems kind of tone deaf too.
It's very interesting. I like this picture because it demonstrates often when I'm there, people are just hanging out. Like, oh, and then you'll see too, this is interesting. People will run out into the middle of the road to take their photo with the axe and then run out. It's a real road. Like,
Yeah.
it's an operational road. This isn't smart. Um, it's weird to me. It's weird. It's weird that people go to the spot and get a photo op at the spot. The idea that it's marked at all is really fascinating. But then often, you'll see like kids playing in the lawn next to it's very weird. It's very performative.
There's something similar going on. I mentioned this to you this morning. They have this TPUSA event going on, and they recreated the Charlie Kirk murder tent, and like people are getting their picture taken in the
Yeah.
facsimile of the tent at this event that's going on right now, and it's like this is like the decorum, the idea of decorum and like tastefulness is like out the window. Like no one's thinking about this stuff.
Yeah.
It's almost like something else is in control of it. I liked a lot of what you had to say about the artifacts being like these energetic containers, or they're attracting
Mhm.
our energy. If you can go back to the slide with the limo, like one has to wonder, is like this like somehow like sucking up our consciousness, and like it's being channeled into this car to produce this sort of outcome, right? It's like in the back of our minds we know, oh, isn't that a Ford Lincoln? Because people, you talk to older people, they like, because all the cars looked very distinctive back then, right? Like, and they didn't have cell phones and stuff like that, so when they're driving to stimulate themselves, they just memorized all the cars, and they
This has
probably
the
instant.
suicide doors too.
Exactly. So like whether or not they're consciously thinking about it, like some aspect of their mind is going, oh wait, that's a Lincoln and Kennedy, and like they're in that moment their mind is like brought to it, and I wonder somehow that consciousness is shaping the outcome. And then also when we look at these containers, these artifact containers of psychic energy, we talked about them like kind of keeping us trapped in these archetypal scripts. But then if we like completely engage in erasure and none of it's there at all, this the whole adage about those who don't know history are destined to repeat it. It's like, what is our relationship with artifacts? We have them, and in a way, we keep adding new characters to cycle through this conveyor belt of archetypes, and we keep projecting our psychic energy onto them and the events, and we never break free, or completely eradicate them, and we just engage in the same risky behavior over and over and over again.
I think that's the mastery of being human. It's interesting. I see 4 monoliths. There's 3 here. There's 1 that we just looked at. We have a bunch of black boxes.
Yeah.
Also, that photograph that Jordan shared about the inside of the memorial, it felt like the last scene of 2001.
Yeah.
The gate. It's like if you'll walk through it, your whole world will expand, just like it did in 2001. It's like, yeah.
It very much is. Yeah. And it's huge and white, and like you're just kind of surrounded by these white walls, and there's nothing but really it's also got lines in it, so it's almost like that grid that they had. Yeah.
And thinking back to what you had to say and revisiting the picture, can you hit that link in the chat? It's the one with Marilyn Monroe and the Lincoln photograph. Just to perhaps look at this, if it is true that our psychic energy is being harnessed with archetypes in order to replicate a future event, when we look at stuff like this, where Marilyn Monroe is like knowingly staring us down, being like, do you understand what's going to happen in this car as I'm carrying around the father figure, right? And then I'm going to be intimately involved with the man whose life parallels this. I've gone back and forth. You could say maybe this is being intentionally staged for the purpose of capturing our psychic energy to bring about that outcome. Like we talk about all the different well, we don't talk about it so much, but in different like conspiracy circles, predictive programming is like a big thing, especially with 9/11. It's like you go through all these like commercials and kids shows and movies and things like that, and there seems to be something about 9/11 there. Was it put there in order to make the event happen? Does someone
with
understand
9/11, I
that?
could talk about it, but not with this
Yeah, what do you
one.
want to say about it?
I want to say that there were actual Israeli companies operating there, and the guy who made that lone gunman episode, he also made another movie about the 9/11 event, and he is closely tied to the Israeli thing. I think a lot of time when people talk about like 9/11 being an inside job, the inside job, it 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 it, it distracts us from the fact that it was actually the Zionists who did that. So it's like it's that's the real thing. But when they call it an inside job, you look at all these people, they blame Bush and everyone, but the real perpetrators, the celebrating Israelis who were taking photographs and everything. So I think all Israel is very much involved in that. I think a few things they did deliberately that I could actually find evidence to.
No, yeah, we can go into that. I'm
Sure.
well versed in that vein of research. I mean, look, there's a lot of dirty hands. Okay, it's there's a lot of dirty hands, but
This
yeah.
one is different.
Well,
Oh yeah,
you
yeah.
dig
Yes,
into the
that is
whole JFK thing. It's
Jordan.
Yeah, you dig in the whole
Yeah.
JFK thing, you're gonna find people who think Israel is behind that too. But if you dig in the whole JFK thing, you're gonna find people who think like everyone's involved in it. They're gonna say it was the mob. They're gonna say it was CIA. They're gonna say it was Cubans. They're gonna say
Did
I
you
that's why I still think these narratives are being pushed on us a little bit.
Did you know that on 9th of October 2023, when America decided that they're going to go into that, they're going to support Israel in that war? Oh, a dude, he fell into this 9/11 memorial, and it was an
Yeah.
event then. It was a weird
Yeah.
thing. I
Yep.
mean,
Yep. 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 Not dissimilar
it's
from
like an
above, not
inverse
dissimilar.
of the JFK thing. Like JFK
Yeah,
thing is
not
built above
dissimilar.
and it's built below. As above, so
And
below.
they
I don't know.
and the JFK thing has like the two green the pin is flanked by two green. To me, when I looked at it from the aerial perspective, they almost look like twin towers. So anyway. All right, we're getting kind of out there.
I don't think so though. I think there's a lot. Like the trees are you also have all the trees at the 9/11 one. Talk
Yeah.
like in Manhattan is a big deal.
Yeah.
Right? You have a
Yeah.
forest, you've planted all these like trees, kind of going back to the tree stuff we talked about very early on with the golden bough. You do, like you said, have this like flanked by the greenery in an interesting way. Um, I don't know, maybe this is just like deeper than you wanted to go, but
Well, what I know is that we're going to be doing this probably for another 8 or 9 months, and that
totally.
we're
This
we're
also looks
we're
like
going to
a
return to it.
keyhole. This one,
Yeah.
the JFK Memorial. I don't know. It looks
Yeah.
like a key. I visited a hotel. It had a keyhole like that. So it looks like
Mhm.
that. Something's about to fit in it, and you're gonna like the St. Peter's Square in Vatican City. It's shaped like a keyhole. So maybe it could
Mhm.
be related to that because he was a Catholic. Okay, yeah.
It's the whole there's a lot of cube symbolism here too, and we could
Yep.
go deep into this and what that means, the Saturnian black cube, but also the idea of New Jerusalem descending upon earth in the shape of golden cube. But I'm not prepared to talk about any of that. And when I say let's bracket this, I know we're going to perpetuate. Like there was a time when we were looking at the Golden Bough, and like Ostick was like, "Let's talk about JFK." Let's talk about. And I was like, "We'll get to There'll be plenty of time to talk about JFK." So there will be plenty of. We're not done. I'm not tabling these things because we won't talk about them in the future. I know we will, and there's just so much more we need to cover today. So we're not done with these subjects at all. Okay. So something from I is it okay to move on, or we're good?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Okay.
shared what I wanted to.
Okay. All right. So there's a lot to be said about this. I mean, last time we had the synchronicity with the Sundance horse breaking free from JFK Airport, the synchronicity that occurred that seemed to be timed well with everything that I was doing here. And then that got me thinking more about the association of horses with the Kennedy administration and the symbolism of it. I I started to find all these horses, like they kept horses on the grounds at the White House. And so I don't think that's been done since. And I'm not sure how much it was done before. So you could go to the White House, go up to the gate, and there'd just be horses there. I think they had one named Macaroni, another, et cetera, et cetera. JFK was not particularly a fan of horses. I think he had some sort of allergy to their hair. But his kids, Jackie was obsessed with horses. I mean, I know that well from where I live. But the imagery of just having the horses on the lawn really does inspire this idea of medieval times and like King Arthur, right? And so that kind of got me down looking at the Camelot angle of all of this. Jackie supposedly named the Kennedy administration and perpetuated this myth of Camelot because JFK particularly there was a musical at the time known as Camelot, and she in Life magazine shortly after the assassination, she said, "Don't let it be forgot that once there was a spot for one brief shining moment that was known as Camelot." And this got me looking. I was like, okay, let's look at all the Arthurian imagery that is associated with JFK. And there's a lot to be said about this. One of them is that King Arthur in some interpretations, and I think was made more decisive to me as a result of a synchronicity I had, I don't know, late last night. Apparently, I have it as like one of the last slides. I don't, Jordan, you can perhaps go to it real quick. It's the one with JFK outside the Kennedy Center. But I was watching YouTube, and there was this news article about how there's all this hubbub in DC right now because Trump renamed the Kennedy Center the Donald J. Trump John F. Kennedy Center. And that caught my eye because clearly I'm doing all this stuff with JFK and looking at the theatrical. I was sick this past week, so I watched like three and a half Shakespeare plays that are connected to JFK and Abraham Lincoln. And as I was watching the news report on this, what's playing at the Kennedy Center right now, of all the things that could be playing at the Kennedy Center right now, it's the Monty Python performance of Spamalot. And what's so interesting is the main character in Spamalot, King Arthur. You see there, he actually has he has a sun on his garment. So this, I think, pretty much confirms to me that King Arthur is a solar figure. So the fact that this is all going on while Spamalot is happening, and the whole idea of like Camelot came from JFK really loving Camelot, seemed to me be kind of a wink and a nudge from the universe. What's also interesting, this summer, I had no idea this was even a thing. It feels like the simulation is rendering as we speak. This summer, the Kennedy Center will be putting on a performance of Back to the Future, which has all sorts of Trump connections or whatever. And I think it does kind of hint at this death return pressure that we've looked at with all these messianic and solar figures that are associated with JFK. I have to wonder if the transmission from the universe is, look, this is all theater, and we're anticipating the return of the king. And there's this unusual relationship between Trump and JFK. You even see it with Melania during the first administration. She wore clothes that channeled Jackie, and there's all this interconnection between timeline jumping and the Back to the Future series, and also QAnon associated with Trump. And many people think that JFK Jr. or JFK is behind that in some weird way. But that's probably a subject we'll delve into it. But if we can go back to the original slide, there were a few other things I wanted to talk about there, Jordan. Specifically some texts that help frame the understanding of what's going on with King Arthur. I believe I had up there Jesse Weston's From Ritual to Romance. This is one of the texts that is coupled with the Golden Bough when it makes its appearance in films like Apocalypse Now. From Ritual to Romance essentially does a Frazerian interpretation of the Arthurian legend. So that's something that I think we'll want to dig in to at some point. I listened to it years ago. I need to understand it better. But also Sir Thomas Malory's Les Morts d'Arthur. Something that, as I've dug into the Arthurian imagery a little bit, is that I've learned that King Arthur actually dies of a head wound, right? He has a mortal head wound. Okay. So that seemed, and it's spelled out in the title, the Les Morts d'Arthur, right? That this is the death of Arthur. So it's built into this whole Camelot thing is not this shining city on the hills situation. There's lots of complex mythology that's going on here. So to associate him with Camelot brings with it all these other psychic tags. But he does, and I'm not exactly sure the mechanics of it. He does go to a place known as Avalon, which I guess is like a paradise situation, and does return. There's this idea that the king will return from Avalon. And to kind of complete the thought here, there are several texts. This is one of them, if you can zoom in on it. King Arthur and the gods of the Round Table. This gets into the idea of King Arthur being a solar image, the sun, and his 12 zodiacal signs, the kings of the Round Table. So there's a lot to dig into, but this does establish that the solar imagery that we've associated with JFK via Apollo, via Christ, via Ulysses, it's consonant with the Camelot story. It's not going away. In fact, it's being amplified and reinforced. Is this a good book? I don't know. It's just one that discusses this idea of the solar imagery of JFK. Or I'm sorry, of King Arthur. And perhaps it would be good to go to the next slide. this is this I have to put my glasses on to read the fine print there. Maybe Jordan can see it better. But this is the Round Table of King Arthur. This is in a castle of Winchester, where we see Arthur placed in the center of the zodiacal table, and also there's this association with the different apostles, kind of creating this archetypal transference between the 12 apostles, the 12 knights of the Round Table. And we can start to see that as far as a solar figure goes, some of the similarities that King Arthur and Apollo have in common, I have here in a table. But I think it's been pretty well established here, and how that carries over to JFK, whether or not it's this incarnate, this symbolism of order, moral clarity, that ultimately gets transformed into the striving for the stars, the Apollonian ideal, and the emphasis on the mastery of material over the Dionysian. So there's that there, and maybe we should go to the next one, Jordan. Okay.
In case you forgot.
Yeah, in case we this whole thing is like motivated by the Apollo missions, and I thought I had it nicely contained to Apollo 1 through 17. No, this is spreading out through all these different world events. Something that's something that I recalled is that you actually, and we're going to be looking at the Apollo 17 traverse maps and landing maps a great deal today. But one thing that jumped out at me initially was that they actually have a Camelot crater, a part of Apollo 17. And wouldn't this be interesting? Because Apollo 17 is the one that actually gives us the image of the Earth for the first time in its totality, the blue marble, which if you go back to previous episodes, we have reason that this might be an image of the Philosopher's Stone, the conjunction between the solar and lunar principles, and ultimately to produce this new type of consciousness symbolized here with this globular Earth. And what's interesting is that Jung himself believed that there to be this parallelism between the Grail legends and the Philosopher's Stone. So to see something connected to the Grail legend involved in that which produces the blue marble, I think is very interesting. Now, I've not had a chance to go into it, but Emma Young and Marie von Franz have this text called the Grail Legend that I believe will develop this a lot more. So, yeah, I'll pause there and let you guys talk for a second while I have a snack.
And what do you think, Ostic?
There's too much information for me to process. But I think it continues in that tradition. I think it resonates with the King Arthur myth. But I'm not sure, like, I'm not familiar with this story to a certain extent. I've seen the Green Knight movie, but I've not seen King Arthur in action other than him pulling out the sword. I saw the parody movie, that the Monty Python movie, but I'm not familiar with his story, like, in earnest.
As Americans, I don't think we're fully acquainted with them as well. And it's something I have to go deeper into. But something, as you mentioned, pulling the sword from the stone, my understanding of the Arthurian legends is largely cobbled together through like Disney movies and, you know, parodies and satirizations of it or whatnot. But it does feed back into the whole idea of artifacts, right? The whole idea of a relic, the sword, lets everybody know that this is the king, right? I think Arthur, when he like pulls it from the stone, he's like the boy king. And it's like really improbable that no one else could pull us from the stone, and he does it. So I think it would be kind of interesting is like, what is the sword? What is the sword that would be associated with JFK? Interestingly enough, QAnon repetitively on the Q boards posted this song called Magic Sword.
Oh,
It's actually a great song.
I mean, them searching for the Holy Grail itself binds them to the myth of Christianity itself. So they are in continuous conversation with, and they're in the same lineage and not apart from it. So the King Arthur story would, like, essentially mirror the Jesus thing and the 12 apostles, the 12, his whatever you call it, Lancelots, something like that. And yeah, I think that would make sense. That there isn't the Holy Grail the blood of Jesus or something?
Yeah,
So yeah,
it was the cup. I'm again the particulars, and I really need to do a lot of research. But
this is I think
one
some
one understanding of the Holy Grail is that it was the chalice that Joseph of Arimathea used to collect the blood of Christ, and somehow it ended up in in England, in Scotland. I've got to go deeper into it, but it
yeah, a
becomes
lot
this
of
sacred.
countries claim it.
Yeah,
Spain
well,
claims it, Portugal claims it.
yeah,
It's a very multi-dimensional symbol and myth, though. The more you meditate on it, I feel like it's a very layered
You're talking
symbol.
about the bloodlines of Jesus, that the
That's not what I
Merovingians.
had in mind, but
Oh,
that's
okay.
one. Yeah. Yeah. That's not what I was thinking. But the Grail itself and the pursuit of the Grail, I've already memory hold most of the Joseph Campbell books I've read on King Arthur, but Luke, we did read one, I think a year ago on
yeah,
audiobook.
yeah. We did listen to something.
And he gets into the pursuit of the Grail. There's a lot there. I mean, it ties into the hero's journey. Mary Magdalene is associated a lot with the Grail as well. You talked about the bloodlines as kind of more of a fringe interpretation, but it's not dissimilar to me as the Philosopher's Stone. And probably there's different layers of initiation or understandings about what the Grail actually is.
Oh,
I don't think
there's tons. I'm
it's not
thinking
one
here.
thing.
I'm thinking here. Perhaps it would be helpful, since I don't think this issue is going to be going away anytime soon. I'm wondering if we should take the next week or two and collectively work our way through Weston's From Ritual to Romance, not only to understand the Frazer better, but to understand these Grail legends better. I think it's like a 10-hour audiobook or something like that. I haven't touched it for 6 or 7 years, so it might be the time to do that, or at least maybe I will.
Yeah. I love it. I mean, I enjoy the Arthurian
I
Yeah,
symbols
have
and stories.
there's a freshness to them, to the imagery, and then I think they're roaming around in nature. That's refreshing. Like I'm living in concrete jungle. Other thing that I saw on a previous slide was the slide with the round table and the
yeah.
fine print that you were seeing. I saw a
Yeah.
swastika there, and I thought is that is that a new slide? Is that a new page?
Did
Like
you see a
between
swastika?
mysterious and
This
Tao, in the middle of the page, below the circle, there's a swastika.
which image are you
Oh, I
looking
see it.
at?
I see it. You got it, Jordan. I see it.
Oh, okay.
It's below the circle. I think it says Mysterium, and to the right of
Oh, yes.
Mysterium. Can you zoom in
Yeah,
on that?
Tau. Yeah, it says mysterious and then Tau, Tau. Natural, supernatural. Yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
know a lot about this image.
It's a
It
very
was
old symbol.
yeah, I was hunting for something that showed the solar qualities of King Arthur, and this was the best thing at the time when I was putting the slide together I could come across. And then with the whole Trump Kennedy Center thing, and then they have Spamalot there with King Arthur with the sun on his chest. I was like, oh, okay, like that's enough for me. But I really should understand the history of this
Satan enter into.
this window or whatever that's in the Winchester Church.
I think it'll come together, like the alchemy imagery starting to come together.
So I don't have a lot of great answers for you, Ostic. I'm not some scholar on this, but I will study up on it and try to have a better handle on it for next time.
Yeah, sure. What else? Yeah, these are the only questions I had. I think I'm anticipating more from you, maybe. Why were you talking about the Apollo 17 things? Like, if they are landing at Camelot, like what would it signify that they are following in the path of that, like they are his knights of the round table that are going around in search for the
Well,
Holy Grail, and
I
then
mean, it feeds into the 12 moonwalkers, right? And the solar figure of Apollo. It's more of like the amalgamation of these different myths. Jordan, can you progress us to the next slide? Okay. Yeah. I'll talk about this for a second while Jordan steps out. I imagine the King Arthur stuff will come back around. We can keep talking about it, but this gives us a jumping off point to talk about Mary Renault and the connections between Theseus and JFK. But yeah, I mean, as far as like what I'm trying to do here, like I haven't completely exhausted all the narrative arcs of the archetypes that seem to be attaching themselves to these world historical figures. Like I've not completely thought out like all the Christic elements that are associated with JFK. I've not completely thought out the Ulyssian, the Apollinian. All I can really say is there seems to be something that's tracking there. I hope to develop them further one day, but it's still very much a work in progress. So yeah. And if the Philosopher's Stone is interchangeable with the Holy Grail, and the point of the Apollo missions is to seek out the Philosopher's Stone, you can see that there is a sharing of an archetypal sharing that's going on there with Apollo, really with the entire Apollo missions, but Apollo 17, if the end product is the blue marble. So
yeah,
I
you
don't know
could
if that's
talk
an
about it.
adequate
This
answer.
Oh no, this one, this Mary Renault thing. Like,
Oh yeah, this is
are you
crazy.
familiar with this? Yeah, sure.
I'm familiar with it now. Okay. I had no idea who this person was. This is actually one of these slides that was inspired by the Downard work. He mentioned this in passing. So JFK was one time, JFK was, we've talked about this before. JFK was a voracious reader. And I've made this point of contention whenever we're looking at films, photographs, whatever. When we see books flashed or dropped or lists or things like that, I think we have to pay special attention. And JFK was once asked who his favorite author was. And he instantaneously, without hesitation, was like, Mary Renault. I was like, who is Mary Renault? So I dug into it. Why was he saying this? Well, during the 1960 campaign, okay, he was apparently totally engrossed by this one particular book that Mary Renault wrote called The King Must Die. So imagine that you're running for president, and a book that is resonating with you is The King Must Die. And it's really all about Theseus, the king of Athens. So I don't know what the running tally, how many kings do we have here? We have Ulysses, the king of, is he the king of Thebes or Crete? I forget, whatever. He's a king. Ulysses is a king. Apollo,
Ithaca.
king of, or we've got all King Arthur. We've got all Jesus Christ, king. We've got all these kings. We have another one with Theseus, who's the king of Athens. And really, if it really demonstrates the whole killing of the king ritual, because the central theme in it is the year king ritual that requires the leader to sacrifice sacrifice children too. And there's something about this that JFK is resonating with, the idea that one has to die at the end of a fixed term or make sacrifices at the end of a fixed term. So he's going in. It seems like at this point he would kind of and he's got he's resonating so strongly with this. At some point he starts to go, oh, like why am I connecting with this text so much? Why am I so easily telling everybody that this is my favorite book? I have not read it, but it clearly brings the killing of the king ritual into play, right? Because we learned through Frazer that the whole Theseus Minotaur thing was connected to the killing of the king ritual. And it raises an interesting question if JFK is Theseus or another youth that is sacrificed to the Minotaur. Because Theseus doesn't die with the Minotaur, right? He kills the Minotaur in the labyrinth and is able to get back out, because that was the other way that one died, through Ariadne's magical threads. So I haven't completely mapped this out, but it's just another instance of the doomed fate of the president already being woven into him, where it's woven in with the Lincoln limousine or the Marilyn Monroe imagery, but now we have this. Now we have this as well. And I've got it on Audible. I'm going to listen to it at some point, but I want to bring that to our attention here. It is the mythic parallels are not as strong as some of the other ones that we've looked at. I think I talk a little bit about Theseus in the next slide or not. I don't know.
The title itself, it's very evocative. I think this is one of the strongest connections to your theory that, you know, universe might be giving him some signs, or like reality might be emerging from within the subconsciousness and making things true in reality. So this is because a lot of things that people do. I read about John Lennon. Then he went to that therapy right after the breakup of the band, and he said that he read this book called Primal Scream Therapy, and he did not read the book. He just looked at the cover and now, what a great cover, Primal Scream, eh? Let's go there. And then he made a decision based on the cover itself. So it's just this title could be evocative for him to carry around, even if not the content of the book, because it's sometimes it's not the content, it's the title, what it indicates. And like you see in The Shining itself, there are a lot of books in there behind Wendy. So if you will start reading all of them, it will take a lifetime. But the titles, they jump around, they move very quickly. They will lead you to different places very quickly because those titles they speak to us somehow. So maybe
Well,
are
especially the
you getting
scene
what
in
I'm
The
saying?
Shining, especially the scene we talked about this before, especially the scene in The Shining with Catcher in the Rye, where Wendy is
Yeah, yeah.
smoking, right, and her cigarette just like burns down, right. There's a lot to be said about that scene. Again, this goes back into the idea of like the soul of the king somehow being contained in an artifact. Books are artifacts, you could argue. And then they're interviewing him about his favorite book, he's like, "Oh yeah, it's The King Must Die." Does that then become this container for that psychic energy that somehow seals his fate in some way?
Under her table, there's also a newspaper article, and there's in that article, it's an article by Susan Sontag, and the title is "Illness as a Metaphor." So she's talking about
Oh yeah,
Danny's
yeah. I read
illness.
that. That's a great essay, by the way.
Yeah, it's a great essay, and I mean that makes sense. It wouldn't make sense in the terms of the content of the book, but like she's talking about like Danny's illness, and she's feigning that it was caused due to trauma by his father. And so it's like illness as a metaphor, because the real thing is he has
Mm.
been traumatized. He's not ill. So it's a wordplay there. But yeah, I think titles are very evocative. They can carry you to a lot of places.
Jordan, I know you kind of jumped in a little late here on this slide. Do you want to say something about it?
No, I think y'all have covered it really well.
There'll be a lot to talk. I really haven't had a chance to develop it, but I was like trying to think about like because the fates are different. Like there's clearly this identification between JFK and Theseus, but like the I mean, and there's something that there's a dissimilarity, right, in the one that lives and the one that dies. Now, a point of similarity that perhaps that you could argue is like the enmeshed tragedy that this is all involved in. If you really wanted to take some poetic license, perhaps it's not so much about the maze and the labyrinth, but um, there is this story about how after Theseus slays the Minotaur, he doesn't put the right flag up, and he's returning home, and there are these black flags waving, and this error um, causes his father to kill himself because he thinks his son has died. And I wonder if there's something like that going on with the assassination and perhaps like the Bay of Pigs. Like perhaps he like as complicated as like the Bay of Pigs situation was, like ultimately he got the soldiers home, but he didn't do something that he ought to have done. And ultimately that dark cloud of sadness was visited upon him regardless. So I don't know. I can't quite make it fit, but there's more to the story. I'm just not an expert on Theseus.
I mean, this story could mean in the way that you win some, you lose some, or in the way that like defeating the Minotaur, he had to change himself in such a way that he has completely forgotten his previous identity, and is now a stranger to his father. I mean, I'm talking about in a metaphorical sense. That is why
Mhm.
the father, he out of shock, he killed himself. Not about the grief, but that could be that just an idea.
Yeah. All right. You know what? I need to get some water. Can we and can we
Take
take
5?
can we take 5?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. You got it.
A god as a father. And I was like, what? I'm not exactly sure how this dual fathership thing works in Greek mythology, but it is a thing. And well, who is Theseus's father? Oh, it's Poseidon. Oh, wait. Poseidon's symbol that is most immediately recognizable is the trident. And I put this all, I have this whole series of slides where I look at the Christic imagery of JFK and the trident, which was, to be honest, the most rewarding thing about putting together this series of slides. But then it caused me to go back and look at the Dealey Plaza trident. You know, we have this forked crossroads where JFK is killed. And I think this individuals have pointed out that there's something highly symbolic about this. And I think one way that we can interpret it along Frazerian lines is to think about there is this dark chthonic power that is possibly setting up Theseus to be in the um, beneficial and the negative scenarios that he is in. And the fact that he dies on a trident could be a way to symbolize the connection to his god father, which is Poseidon. Now, I think there's a way that this fits a little bit better with biblical imagery, which we'll get to in a little bit. But knowing the Renault, JFK, King Must Die, Theseus, Poseidon connection, it does add a pretty interesting interpretive layer to this.
It does. It does. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, this one, yeah, it's good. It's like,
Okay.
yeah,
It's going to get real crazy when we look at the Christ stuff, but we'll get there.
That's
We'll
where
get
I
there.
wanted to
But
go, but I was like, I think that's
yeah, we'll
coming.
get there.
But the hidden
Yeah,
cross, that's kind of the
yeah, the
takeaway
hidden
here.
cross. Yeah. I think that's stronger right now. But in time, my mind could change. Maybe I'll say the Poseidon narrative is stronger. Right now, I think the Christ narrative is stronger here. So let's keep going,
the
Jordan. Let's keep
Poseidon,
trucking. And
the symbol is also
by the way,
dolphin, Poseidon's. That
yes, and Apollo is a dolphin. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, something I did not know, Christ was associated with the dolphin. So just keeping track here a little bit. I meant to include this last time. We're going to look at this. The kings that are associated with JFK, Macbeth, he in the murder of King Duncan, right? Theseus, the king must die. King Arthur from Camelot, Ulysses as a king, Apollo, and Christ. So these are just some. There are more. But this is the running. This is the running count. And as I have talked about earlier in the presentation, the slot that these different kings fill are a little bit different. You know, with being associated with Macbeth, you know, the center is destabilized in the universe when he kills King Duncan. So there's no real hint of return, which is something I learned because I was able to watch the Fassbender Macbeth this past week while sick, which are pretty gory, but I really enjoyed it. Same deal. There is a death pressure with Theseus. King Arthur, we talked about earlier, coming back from Avalon, there's the death and return pressure. Odysseus, we have the return pressure, but not the death pressure. And we do have the cyclical nature of Apollo, him going to a Hyperborea and coming back. And Christ would clearly have the death and resurrection pressure. So it does point to the idea that there are different types of king archetypes with different characteristics that are descending upon JFK in a variety of ways. We can keep going. And Jordan, I want you to keep time for us. Jordan has has the hard stop. So you have to let us know when we need to bring things to an
You
end.
got it.
Okay. Asik, what were we going to say?
I was going to say that for your viewers, could you clarify what those pressures mean? Like, what do you mean by when you say pressures? It's like in the narrative story of his life, those are the acting
Yeah.
pressures in the sense. Yeah, it could
Right,
be.
right. That there's something doomed about them, and then there's something also about a return. I don't know if I'm prepared to say anything deeper about it than that. But
Yeah, sure.
yeah, those are the narrative arcs. Okay. So I found this just out in the wild because right now I've alluded to, I think, so far the similarities between JFK and Christ, but it really wasn't until I watched that XTC video, um, the Peter Pumpkinhead video that I loved as a kid, um, that I was like, oh, other people were picking up on this similarity, and this is a poster from the 1964 World's Fair. And when I first found this, I found this on eBay. You can get it. And I first found this, this is just like folk art, right? This is like outsider art. Somebody who just loved America, loved Kennedy, loves Jesus, not really thinking probably too deep. I'm assuming a lot of different things, but just sort of constellated all these different figures together. An image that was sold in the 1964 World's Fair. And you know, you see the solar imagery associated with Jesus with his halo, right? His arm around JFK with the solar cross, right? The Apollo rockets in the background, and then Father Abraham, kind of creating this Trinity um, imagery there. And I really think this is just like a genuine outpouring from someone who had some sort of artistic skill. I don't know if they were trying to make some deep message about Jungian archetypal theory, but it does sort of capture how it gets woven into the psyche. And I'm not really sure were saying anything more than like the first order reading of what's going on here, that these were heroes that ought to be looked up to. I don't think they were trying to make a point that they were interchangeable or sharing the same essence or caught up in this whole killing of the king ritual. I think they were just trying to say, like, these are people that I identify with and who ought to be held up in our society. And there's a lot more going on here with Lady Liberty and the Catholic Church and Jackie, etc. But it was just a really wild painting. This is not a schizo like me putting together images for a book. This is just probably a heartfelt outpouring of artistic spirit, and probably proves a lot of what Jung is talking about.
This is a modernist imagery. It's modernist meme. Sorry, it's like
Yeah.
nowadays we have postmodern memes. This is like a modernist meme. They're
Yeah.
very sincere. But I don't think it could be 64 because Apollo is launching. It could be around 68, 67, maybe.
Well,
Or-
so okay, I should say this gets into like some minutia of the timeline. I mean, you had the Mercury and Gemini program going, and you had the Apollo mission. I think a lot of the hardware for the Apollo mission was being developed between 64 and 68. I think I've got to go back and look at this. It might have been the 64 World's Fair that the Apollo rocketry and the specs for it, whatever, was debuted to the public. And so this poster coming out at the same time, it'd be interesting to know if the person who made this was aware that the Apollo rockets and whatnot would be on display. I believe this is the World's Fair in Corona, Flushing, Queens. And so what we know about this is that Kubrick picked a lot of the individuals who put the stuff together to work on 2001: A Space Odyssey. This is like where the overlap between the NASA project and 2001 starts really happening. But it could be a Gemini rocket, it could be an Atlas rocket or something like that. But the point remains that ultimately it's going to culminate in the Apollo moon missions, which everybody knew about.
yeah, the World's Fair. This is a great event. I always think about it. That in terms of Nikola Tesla, him showing all his equipments and Edison there. So it's always a fresh thing. I should look into it further. All these world fairs, what kind of people were there?
Yeah. They didn't it wasn't really a thing for us in America. Apparently, this was a big deal. I don't know when they stopped having them. Or at some point, maybe the state fairs overtook the world fairs at some point. State fairs are pretty common. But I've never been to a World's Fair.
Aren't we supposed to have one soon?
I think
Like
there
in
was some
Ohio
talk
or
about
something?
Trump. Yeah, I think there was some talk about Trump bringing one back or something. But I mean, I never really heard about World's Fairs as a kid. Now there's all this like conspiracy theory out there that the World's Fairs were like somehow like a disclosure or cover up of Tartaria or something like that. You go back in time like 100 years and people are like, how did we build this World Fair stuff and tear it down? It's kind of funny, but I'm not going to get into that.
Oh, the incubator babies?
Incubator.
You don't want to get into
babies.
that?
The Cabbage
A lot of-
Patch Kids, the orphan trains, the repopulation after the event.
Yeah, I think all these science fiction writers, they were pretty heavily involved in the ideas that went into them, like G. Wells and Jules Verne and all that. So I think
Oh yeah.
that plays a role because they were had very strange ideas. All these uh, like in the 1920s, these people, I don't know what society they were called. I think Fordist. I had to search for the real word. They had a particular name, and they had these very strange ideals about, very optimistic about the future and a world
Yeah.
government. I think H.G. Wells also talks about nuclear bomb being built and it being detonated creates a world government, and that's a good thing that a world government is able to form after detonating this nuclear device. So
Yeah,
that
there was a
had
big push of it. Something else I wanted to add here. I think I've mentioned this before that JFK was recovering from a back injury and he wrote Profiles in Courage. This is a great quote. Jordan, would you read this quote for us?
In whatever arena of life, one may meet the challenge of courage. Whatever may be the sacrifices he faces if he follows his conscience, the loss of his friends, his fortune, his contentment, even the esteem of his fellow men, each man must decide for himself the course he will follow. The stories of past courage can define that ingredients. They can teach, they can offer hope, they can provide inspiration, but they cannot supply courage itself. For this, each man must look into his own soul.
Pretty eloquent. And of course, there is the ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. When I think about these passages, and we look at the Renault novel that he was obsessed with, The King Must Die, and all this other imagery that he was associated with, his love of Camelot. And look, there's a very learned man. He knew that Arthur died of a head wound, right? He's associating himself with all this imagery of kings that are tried and killed. Knowing that now, and you look at the emphasis on sacrifice. When you think about JFK, you think about this quote: "Ask not what you can do for your country, but ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." It seems like he understands in a way that we're not talking about like he's going to have to work hard for the country, that he may be like a lamb for the slaughter. He seems to have some notion of that. And I wonder if that's what's coming through these statements. And when you look back on it, you go, wait, did he know that this was going to happen all along? Was he associating himself with the imagery in case that did happen so he could be mythologized? It adds a different vibe to these statements about sacrifice that he was always talking about, like that this was maybe bordering on the eschatological, not like you need to volunteer more.
Yeah, I mean that adds a whole emotional layer to that. To know the day of your death is it's like the worst thing that happens to people. But like it could have had he could have had soldierly attitudes towards it maybe, but it does add a lot of layers. A lot of people talk about that John Lennon, he faked his death in that way. that he had actually got cancer, and then he maybe thought that maybe I could create myself as a martyr, have myself get killed by that guy. So there's a lot of these theories, but I mean, even knowing
Some
that,
people think he's Jobs.
yeah, that's a different thing.
Yeah,
One other
it's
aside,
uncanny.
yeah, I mean, the Apple thing and the nose, it could be that. One other synchronicity or personal anecdote with this statement: ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. So, I mean, I was very familiar with this statement growing up, and like I was a kid here, and I knew about this statement and what he made, and I did not know the context of it. But a few months ago, I was researching about the pyramids, like how were they built, what are the archaeological evidence, how were the people kept, and like why did people even decide to build them? So the theory that they had come up with, looking at the service quarters and people, that they were engaged in pyramid building because they thought it was for the greater good. And then thinking about them, the pyramid builders, I thought about this quote from him, that, oh, ask not, because that was the value that was they postulated, the archaeologists. This is the value that was governing them and motivating them to build these pyramids, because there is no economic reason to do that. There's a little economic reason, that it provides employment to people, but there's not a bit more, lot of incentive to do these things. These are very monumental tasks. So the spirit, it was like a communal event, you know, like Jordan talked about in the beginning, that that event, his death, it creates a lot of emotional responses from people, because we as humans, we live in a, supposedly we live in a society that we have relative subjectivity, that I think differently, you think differently. There's very rare when people align themselves to with each other. Oh yeah, I agree on that, like really agree. It's like seeing the same things, smelling the same thing. But that is what we maybe desire, because maybe as humans we were in a vulnerable position, so we needed to have that kind of group cohesion at first. But I think this is what, like the whole JFK thing and a lot of these events, they touch through our religious buttons in deep inside us, that want to believe in a shared vision, that I want to believe just as the next person, that, oh yes, we saw the same thing, we feel the same thing, we're in this together. So that kind of, whatever way that kind of thing is achieved, maybe in combat, maybe even in office situations when you're both in trouble, or that shared experience, that has a religious element to it, that maybe fosters a stronger bonding between people, more group cohesion. So I'm just talking a lot of different things, but this is what comes through to me, that there's this idea of a cohesion, there's need, because we do not want to have people having this random opinions to ourselves. We want people who are familiar to us to feel the same thing sometimes, because universe, it's a kind of meaningless if you don't have that, if you don't get reflected your mind. It's like you're abandoned, you don't have anyone, maybe. So just wanted to share that whole thing.
I, I always appreciate you being outside the culture, so far away from us geographically. It really does add a very important insight into all this imagery that we are just swimming in over here. You know, it's interesting to see that you relate to it in similar ways and dissimilar ways, and what resonates with you and what doesn't. It's been pretty cool. Shall we go on? Okay. I'm not gonna dwell on this forever. When I was watching the Ballad of Peter Pumpkinhead by XTC, I just started taking notes of all the different things. Um, and how exactly like JFK and Christ overlap. Some of the ones that were interesting, right? The 3 nails that go into the crucifixion of Christ and the 3 bullets that hit JFK, the feminine witnesses. We've talked about this throughout our conversations about JFK. How Marilyn Monroe seems to have some sort of shared identity with Mary Magdalene. One that was interesting to me in the XTC, the Ballad of Peter Pumpkinhead story, he talks about how he was showing the Vatican what gold was for, right? All the social reform programs that JFK wanted to do. It reminded me of how Jesus related to the establishment, the establishment of Judaism, and within his, there's this whole talk about Jesus was a Jew, but also antagonistic to the Judaic power of his time. And they made a big deal about this in America because they didn't want Americans being at that time primarily a Protestant culture, didn't want a Catholic president that was ultimately enslaved to the dictates of a pope. There was very strong anti-papal sentiment over here, and he had to distance himself from the Vatican. Hence, one of the conspiracy theories is that somehow his assassination is traceable to that. I have no idea. So I think that's interesting. Jordan, if you could maybe go through the other slides. I had ChatGPT kind of rank these. I think these are all provisional. I think you could argue that some are higher and some are lower. The head wound, right? The crown of thorns, the missing brain of JFK, which we've talked about earlier. The surviving the cross through resurrection. Some people have charged that Jesus was a magician because he was able to do that. And then we have this talk about the magic bullets of JFK, the public crossroads at which the crucifixion happened, and Dealey Plaza, where JFK was killed, with the cross, with the X on the road. So these are just some, and there are many more that we'll cover at some point. The biggest one is I want to go to this Trinity sign, this Trident sign. So we can keep going if you'd like.
Just one
Sure.
addition. There's a mention of intimate witness that you're talking about, that it attributes to Marilyn Monroe. But I think the stronger intimate witness or a stronger through line with Jesus could be the Pieta imagery of Virgin Mary holding her son, and it's like the same thing that happens with Jackie. He gets shot sitting right beside her, and little blood gets spilled on her. So it's like that. Maybe it's a stronger thing, that Virgin Mary
Ooh,
comparison with Jackie. There's a Pieta
I'm
imagery.
totally open to it. Yeah, she is like a kind of a Black Madonna figure. So I like that. And for those of you who've seen this for the first time, we've talked about Marilyn and Jackie being light and dark sides of a similar feminine archetype associated with the moon. Okay. I'm going to get to that Trident thing. I guess I'm a little bit all over the place here. We talked about Jackie O marrying Aristotle Onassis last time. And this is a picture of them in the back of a car. And I was talking about, a lot of Jackie O's fashion choices, even changing her name from Kennedy to O, kind of in some ways symbolized Kennedy going to the moon. And one of the conversations that we had was how when she was in Greece, she saw a performance of Sophocles' Electra. I was actually able to see Euripides' Electra. It's like a 1962 version. It's free on YouTube. But what's interesting about the Electra symbolism that is carried around with a forever mourning Jackie is that really there's this idea that the house of Atreus, which is connected to Electra and Orestes, is talked about in terms of a curse. And one can't help but think about the supposed curse of the Kennedys and something that I did not know. I was like, how long did this curse follow Jackie around? Well, it followed her into her marriage with Aristotle Onassis, which I knew next to nothing about. Aristotle, I guess, was a shipping tycoon worth untold billions in today's currency. I'm not exactly sure. But shortly after he married Jackie O, then personal distress started happening in his own life. I think he lost children at young ages. And the heir that was left to him to take over the Onassis fortune was a woman who would die early herself. I believe she died at age 37. Her name was Christina Onassis. And because there were so many personal tragedies that happened after the marriage to Jackie, this daughter of Aristotle's um, started to I guess, in conversations with her father, openly started to refer to Jackie as a Black Widow, and that wherever she was, just disaster was falling around. And you see in the RFK biographies talking about the House of Atreus and connection to the Kennedy curse. There seems to be some juice to this. I don't know how exactly this happens unless we're talking about archetypal charges. Something that's interesting, if we stay with Anima Moon figures, the figure of Hecate, the kind of associated with the dark moon, which I've associated with Jackie, does have something to do with mourning and curses. So because this curse is following Jackie around, we might say that there is something about Hecate that can be associated with her. Is that strong? I don't know. It just there's this example from Greek mythology that helps us understand what's going on here. Something that I mentioned, but perhaps did not develop it well enough, is that it's interesting that she ended up with a man named Aristotle. And why it's interesting that she ended up with a man named Aristotle, from the fact that she ended up with someone who's named after a philosopher is super interesting, because that's kind of what the output of the Apollo missions are. The solar and lunar conception results in the Philosopher's Stone. So we seem to have that encoded into her marriage. But also Aristotle um, wrote was probably the most profound writer on Greek tragedy in his book The Poetics, and talked about the necessity of catharsis in Greek tragedy. So it's very interesting that the Kennedys and the Onassis have this Greek tragedy woven into their narratives. Also, Aristotle, though not an alchemist, his metaphysics, and I'm not some expert in it, his metaphysics kind of lay the groundwork for medieval alchemy, especially when we talk about the prima materia and how we divide up in the world into earth, air, water, fire. So it is interesting, if there is something alchemical going on here, that the elements to think about alchemy largely come from the philosophical work of Aristotle. So I just wanted to revisit this a little bit. I don't know if you guys have anything to add.
I mean, not specific to this slide, but the Aristotle, he laid the groundwork for modern thought and modern science altogether. Like
Yep.
even scientists, they were in conversation with Aristotle. It stood the
Yep.
test of time for around 1500 or maybe even 2000 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that was it.
There's a lot more that can be mined here. You know, this alone we could talk about forever, like any of these images. But it is interesting. This whole Jackie was not beating the charge that a curse was following her around. I just did not know it extended into the Onassis.
Her date of death is also so interesting.
When
One
did she
one one
die?
one nine and 88. So
Wait,
it's the
which
reverse of the
she?
9/11/111.
Oh,
Christina
okay.
Onassis.
Oh, look. Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
19th of November. So 11119. So it's the if you reverse that, it's 9/11/2001.
Yeah,
So it's like that.
that is interesting. That is interesting. Jordan, do you have anything to say?
Just the theme of like how the different women fit into more prominent aspects of the feminine being represented makes a lot of
What do
sense to
you
me.
what do you see, or what is resonating with you?
Jackie having more of the Mother Mary energy makes sense to me. That's what I would say.
Can you uh, drag that out a little bit more?
Sure. I mean, I think it's kind of like in contrast to Marilyn Monroe, who has the capacity to kind of step into like the Mary Magdalene archetype, being at least in our stories, seen not as a mother, but as kind of more individual,
Hmm. More.
independent woman compared to Mother Mary, who her role is, talked about as being nurturing and more of the vessel of life being created through her, uh,
Mm.
not like the end result in and of herself. And I'm not saying this is right or wrong. Ultimately, the divine feminine is all of these things integrated wholly. So I'm not trying to make a judgment on them, but that's kind of what I see. And you see in
I
the
should.
story of Jesus as well, like you have these different women who play different roles in his own hero's journey.
Yeah. I should mention, and I didn't have it on that list, but Agamemnon from Electra is a king. So that's another king figure that's wow, that's woven into
Oh,
the
yeah.
JFK narrative.
I think I'm just taking that for granted
Yeah.
at this
And
point.
it's easy to. There's a lot to keep track of. It's like nailing jello to a wall here.
Yeah.
All right. Should we go to the next one?
Sure. I'd say probably 20-minute warning.
Okay. Okay. Um, I'll be brief about this. I thought maybe we talked about this last time about how the books that Marilyn Monroe foreshadows relationships that she's going to have. I won't go too far into it, but I did a little bit of a deeper dive into the themes. I had read Death of a Salesman as like a junior or senior in high school, and any of the people I had not. Both of them are rather deflationary. It's like they're masculine images who are like crushed under the machinery of American society. And I find that to be kind of interesting because it does create the backdrop of the solar hero, of the Ulyssian hero that is JFK to emerge. So it's like one is deflationary and one is inflationary. There's not a Ulyssian element. They're kind of like anti-Ulysses figures. So one is kind of setting up the other temporally. But I didn't really have much more to say about it than that. We could go deeper into it, but I was just curious. I was curious as like, is there something about Willie Loman? Is there something about Stockton or whatever that's in Enemy of the People that continues on this Ulyssian theme? It's more about one is setting the stage for the other.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, I'm thinking about from Marilyn's point of view, like if she had an experience with a person who was kind of diminutive in that sense of, and because if you're writing those characters, you're kind of in that zone mentally in that way. So she might go out and seek a more powerful and more expansive, like visionary person on her own,
Mm,
because it's not that someone
exactly.
is sending her on the stage to wish the president a birthday. She's like volunteering and like excited to form new connections. So maybe that.
Exactly. And I don't know. I mean, I didn't go too much into the biography of Miller to be like, is Miller writing himself into these novels? And perhaps we would find that his life arc is similar. I just don't know enough about him. Okay. Slide 579. Is that okay, Jordan? Whew. Okay. All right. Now we're getting into Shakespeare. So, um, this was the really uncanny thing. I believe Downard first brought this to my attention. Is that I believe it was October 4th, 1961, where Jackie set up these Shakespearean actors to come in and do excerpts from Shakespearean plays for JFK and the president of Sudan. I believe his name was Aboud. I don't know too much about him, but a lot of people were ears pricked up when they found out about this, that Macbeth was played for JFK, especially the scene called the murder of King Duncan, right? Um, and it's pretty uncanny, right? Especially in the wake of the assassination, because it seems like it maps pretty well onto a lot of the figures that were involved in this time slice of history. For instance, like Lady Macbeth, right, is the kind of the power behind Macbeth that motivates this whole thing. And then you've got a first lady in waiting whose name is Lady Bird. So that's pretty freaky. Not to mention that the way that and I'm not implying that Lady Bird Johnson had anything to do with the death of JFK. I don't know anything about this. It's just strange. Similarly, the way that Macbeth gets away with the murder of King Duncan. Don't let me spoil it for you. It's only been 500 years or whatever. But the way that Macbeth gets away with it, is that he tranquilizes the guards and then slits their throats and so they never really have a chance to answer for a crime that they've been framed for. Well, wouldn't you know, that sounds a lot like Oswald, right? Oswald never has the opportunity to say, oh no, it wasn't me, it was somebody else, et cetera, et cetera. Most we get out of him, he says I'm Patsy, and then Jack Ruby shoots him, right? So it's like he is the framed, silenced guard. And there are many, many other things that we could point to. Now, there was someone, I believe her name was, you can zoom in on that, Jordan. I can't see it from down here in the bottom right-hand corner. I'm not the first to pick up on this. Downard was not the first to pick up on this, but there were individuals at the time. I believe this woman named Barbara Garson in the bottom right-hand corner. She, I believe in the late 60s, put together a play that was a retelling of Macbeth and called it Macbird, and recast all the characters with like LBJ and Lady Bird Johnson and all this other stuff. Apparently this ran, it was kind of a bit of a phenomenon, and it people were picking up on the synchronicities here. I don't know how seriously they took this, or they're just like, oh wow, sometimes strange things happen, kind of like, oh, maybe it's just a strange thing that like all the people who died in the Challenger explosion had twins. Life is strange. Ossick seems surprised. We'll get into that one day, I'm sure. But if you can go back to the main slide, Jordan. So there's something about the Macbeth story that seems to telegraph the fate of JFK. Now, keeping in mind the parallelism between JFK and Abraham Lincoln, I discovered that JFK was obsessed with Shakespeare and specifically Macbeth. I believe even like 2 nights before he was assassinated, he was quoting Macbeth on this boat to everyone. And then he was assassinated. People go, "Oh my God!" Like he's like, it's like he knew that he was going to be killed, and of course he gets killed in a theater by a Shakespearean actor, John Wilkes Booth, who's part of a Shakespearean family who had performed Macbeth, had performed Hamlet, had performed Richard III, had performed all these things, especially Macbeth and Hamlet, which involves the killing of the king. And so I'm just getting this going here. There's something about Shakespeare that is following these men around. You could argue that because they are slotting into certain sort of archetypal roles, and the best thing that we had at the time were the Shakespearean tragedies, that these started constellating and mapping themselves onto these individuals, and they didn't even know what they were doing. Supposedly, Jackie was the one who put together this night of Shakespeare in the White House. And I dug a little bit deeper into that because I was like, well, there were 3 segments that were portrayed. The first was I believe it was the St. Crispian speech from Henry V, which was this nationalistic jingo speech that was not unlike the going to the moon speech. Like, we're all sort of unified in doing this terrific thing. And then also Prospero's soliloquy at the end of The Tempest, where it talks about the dream dissipating, right? Which is how a lot of people felt about the end of the Kennedy administration and how like Camelot like dissipated. So I guess again, this is a synchronicity between the 2 presidents that seems to be in play that not a lot of people talk about. And if you can go forward a little bit, Jordan, because we'll probably get these all out of the way. And then that got me thinking about these Apollo 7 traverse maps again, because I noticed earlier when I was putting together this presentation that Camelot was diagonal from Shakespeare. So we have, they used all these literary figures, and this is a reduced one. That's, I believe here I have a much more complicated one. But throughout the Apollo 17 landing, they have all these different literature references. Now, it happens in the Taurus Littrow Valley. Well, I was thinking Taurus. Oh, the bull. And then I was like, oh, okay. That is going to be connected in my mind to the bull of heaven. Well, what happens with the bull of heaven? Well, the bull of heaven is sacrificed in Mithraism. It's something called the Tauroctony, where they would slay this bull for fertility rituals and regeneration. And what else do we have in the Apollo 17 map? Well, we have a feature known Lincoln Scarp. Okay. So we have Lincoln, we have Camelot, we have Shakespeare, we have Horatio from Hamlet. We've talked about the Sherlock. So we have, directly and indirectly, we have both JFK and Abraham Lincoln within the bull region, the bull of heaven region of the Apollo 17 landing. And that seems to me that there is some sort of mythic story going on here about king and bull sacrifice. That's the way that I'm reading it. Now there's more there. There's more there that we can get into. And I don't go into all these, like, the Cochise and the tortilla flat and what that all means. And we'll look at other maps here, but that seems to me to be pretty coherent. And why is this happening? This is the end of the Apollo missions. Why are there all these literary figures here? Maybe we've done all this math and science and we're looking to find the meaning of why we went. And so we're grasping unconsciously, because a lot of the astronauts are naming this stuff. They're just pulling things out of thin air. It's like, oh yeah, name that Lincoln, name that Shakespeare, name that Camelot. Like, it's the way it's portrayed is that it was all like helter skelter. But maybe there was something working through those astronauts say, hey, we're wrapping this up. Can we try to wring out some meaning about why we even went through this pageant of going to the moon?
Did we even talk about Normandy yet? Did I miss that?
We have not talked about Normandy yet. We'll see if we can get there.
Okay.
You go ahead and bring it up. You can bring up Normandy.
Well, if you have a slide, I was just on the prior slide.
I have a slide. It's towards the end with Churchill on it.
Okay. We'll get there. If not today, next week.
Yeah. Well, do you want to say something about Normandy?
Just the prior slide when you're talking about King Henry V. I don't want to steal the.
It's okay. We can talk. I'll tell you guys about it. I mean, that way you can add your comment. The long and the short of it is, if you go to the one with Churchill on it, is that, and I mentioned that Henry V was performed right there. That's the one. Henry V was performed along with Macbeth, along with Prospero's soliloquy. And on YouTube, they had Henry V with Sir Laurence Olivier in it. And it's from 1944, 1945. And I was watching, I was like, they made this during World War II? And I started to get kind of curious about it. I was like, how are you going to do this in the midst of the Normandy invasions? And in the movie, they land in Normandy and invade France. And I found out that Churchill relieved Sir Laurence Olivier of his duties to make this film for propaganda purposes. And he gave £500,000 to the production of this film in order to make people feel good about the war effort. Okay, but then you put your thinking cap on. This comes out a few months after the D-Day invasion, and it's being made before the D-Day invasion happens, and it's telegraphing the Normandy invasion. I was told growing up that was a closely held secret, that the Germans were not supposed to know where you were going to land. But apparently the people that were making this film, either they guessed really well, or the movie was chosen for this reason, for predictive programming or something like that. It seems like it wasn't that well guarded a secret. If it's like, hey, we're going to make this Henry V movie to make people feel good about the war. And by the way, it telegraphs where we're going to land. I don't know how to make sense of this if loose lips sink ships, you're going to have a whole like film staff know where we're going to land. And by the way, the whole band of brothers thing that was going on throughout World War II, it comes from Henry V. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood will with me shall be my brother. It's actually a pretty good movie. But yeah. Yeah, and they edited out some morally compromising things that are in the original to really make people want to go and fight for England. Of course, there's some things that are different. We're not fighting against the French, but you're going to go to France to fight against the Nazis. But then it comes out after the invasion. It's
all very weird.
It doesn't make any sense to me. It's like best to not think too hard about it. It's one of those things.
Maybe so.
So what do you want to say about Normandy?
No, like that's it.
Okay. Well, we can go back to the moon landing.
Yeah, we probably have time for one more slide. I
Okay.
just thought all that was insane. Watching
It
the
is
King
insane.
Henry V, it was a fun movie. Like it was very well
was good.
done.
Laurence Olivier is awesome in it.
When
he has a great haircut too.
All the haircuts are
Yeah.
amazing, hysterical, amazing. I can't decide which. They're quite good. Yeah, and it reminded me too of how, because they added kind of this meta narrative that wraps around it. It made me think of Men Who Stare at Goats, where they wrapped a meta narrative around it as sort of war propaganda to relate to our modern age. The wrapper around this particular Shakespeare is still done in the style of Shakespeare, but I feel like you can kind of tell it's written a little bit differently. So it's not quite the same thing, but just connecting the dots, it feels like propaganda on a level. And the more we look into the Shakespeare, I'm just like, what are we looking at? Like, this is programming to the max, which makes it even more insane that many phrases we have today supposedly originated from Shakespeare. A lot of colloquialisms, a lot of sayings that are really common come from Shakespeare. And it's one of those interesting, it's on the, difficult to decipher. It's very highbrow and lowbrow at the same time. It's this weird Trojan horse, I think, for programming.
I had to put the captions on to understand it. I do think we should speed run 581 to 583 since I was teasing it all presentation. But I want to give Osik, can you? I'll try to do 581 to 583 in like 3 minutes. Do you have a response that you can contain to a minute?
I think you should go on with this one.
Right.
The thing that jumped out to me was the Sherlock thing, because it invites us to make deductions like Sherlock would. So that was interesting. Other than that,
got to be a detective.
Yeah, that's the thing that I remember about you. That you posted about that Sherlock theory. That he's inviting us to think like Sherlock Holmes. Yep.
All right. So here's a much more detailed map of Apollo 17's landing spot. This is there. A lot of these features did not get codified officially, but something that got my attention. Again, we have Trident. So the Trident is back. And we have Faust. I think the Faust thing is going to be important when we talk about Werner von Braun, the Faustian bargain with the Nazis and Operation Paperclip, and bring in Dr. Strangelove. But I'm not prepared to talk about that. But they did go to Trident Crater during Apollo 17. Now let's go forward or go back to Dealey Plaza. So if we can go to the next slide, Jordan. Okay, so I think this explains Dealey Plaza. And right now, I think it's a better explanation than the Poseidon Trident or the Neptune Trident. Okay, so digging into this, I found out that in early Christian iconography, that the trident itself was like a secret cross, okay? And oftentimes, this trident, because of the Piscean mariner fishery or fishing imagery that's associated with Christ, was also transformed into anchors. So anchors and tridents were synonymous in a lot of ways. So as Christians were operating in these pagan societies, they could identify themselves. And they also rebranded the dolphin. The dolphin associated with the anchor. Now, when you look at that and you see that out in a museum or art or something like that, you know that the dolphin, because the dolphin is a very smart and helpful creature of the ocean that helps sailors, you know that individuals at one point understood that to be an image of Christ. Now, we take all of this into consideration. The trident itself is not just an image of the cross, but also a representation of the Trinity in early Christian thought. Okay? So perhaps that brings in the Poseidon element, the chthonic power in the background that is making the king die. So maybe we can make all of this harmonize in some way with the Theseus myth that we talked about earlier. Here, here are some remnants of it. You see this image of Jesus in a circular rainbow with dolphins around him. Like, this is an example of how that dolphin imagery was associated with Jesus. Also, I do not know about this for sure. A lot of Catholics will push back on this. The hats that a lot of the papal figures will wear in the Catholic Church, they do very much seem like dolphin heads. There's been this great debate about whether or not that's associated with fish god worship and Dagon. I'm not going to get into it, but it seems to be kind of present in the mythopoetic background. Now, why is all this interesting in regards to JFK? We looked at the Scottish clan heraldry. For Kennedy, it has a dolphin. We looked at the ships, the CV 67 and 78 or 72, I forget, but both of them have dolphins on them, right? And we looked at that last time in context with Apollo being associated with dolphins, because there is the story about Apollo transforming himself into a dolphin. That's how he got the name Apollo Delphinus. And it's where we get the word dolphin from. We get it from Apollo and how he guided the sailors to I believe it was the Delphic Oracle. So all of these images are of dolphins are constellating around JFK, Apollo, and Christ. Now look at this image. This is JFK leaving church. Look at this. Look at this. Knowing what we know now, look at this. He's immediately below Jesus on the cross, right? So as above, so below, we're looking at some sort of identification between him being ritualistically murdered, okay? And then he's walking out with a priest. And I don't know where this pattern comes from, but he's got crosses in the shape of a trident, right? This image, this one image of him coming out of church, snapped like this. I don't think anyone's posing this. This is just life captured. It is foreshadowing his death at Dealey Plaza.
It also looks like his head is on a pike. The priest's.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean,
this is
does.
spooky. This is beyond spooky. Or am I just reading? Am I projecting? I mean, look how perfectly aligned he is with the cross and how cozy he is to that symbol, that trident.
It's also the grassy knolls thing. Maybe all
I know.
the thing around the grass. Yeah.
Do we want to say like that Christoph is posing these people in the Truman Show? It looks like he's just coming out of church.
When was this taken? It was taken on the day of the assassination or somewhere around it?
No, I don't know when it was taken. I don't know. I'll have to go back and find out. That would make it even crazier if it was. I don't know. I doubt it was taken the day of the assassination.
I mean, yeah, it all ties in together, this one. I have no complaints about it. It's like, oh yeah, this is another thing. It's another layer. It's like you're making a chocolate cake and they're adding more layers to it. That
No.
It works for me because I think we see signs of maybe death every day. Like, I'm not trying to be spooky. It's just that things come at us, we are not able to recognize them. So it's fitting that he might have gotten a hint. It's for us to know.
Jordan probably has to leave in 90 seconds. I want to close. Can I do one more slide? 1 minute. Just give me 1 minute.
Okay.
All right, look at this. So if the trident is associated with the cross, now we got to rethink. It's who died on 11/22/63? JFK, Aldous Huxley, and C.S. Lewis. What now? Now I think this makes more sense, the whole dying in threes thing, because 2 other men were crucified along with JFK or with Jesus, the 2 thieves. One believes in Jesus, one doesn't. Oh, C.S. Lewis believes in Jesus. Aldous Huxley does not. And they're pointing at different forms of transcendence. We have the Christ transcendence with C.S. Lewis. We have the drug disintegration of the ego with Aldous Huxley. It's a gross mischaracterization of it. I know, I got 30 seconds here. And then we have JFK somehow blending the two through the Apollo program, that there's like a merger of heaven and earth by going to the moon. And then that ultimately is going to give birth to this philosopher's stone, this overview effect, where we sense that the self is disintegrating in the sea of humanity. That's
This would
it.
make a great script. This would make a great
Oh my
script and an
gosh.
ending sequence. It's like the symbolism is so fertile in here.
Yeah. All right. Jordan's got to go.
Bye.
Bye.
No final
Thank you,
words.
everybody.
Yeah. Bye.